Hi, joining me now is our friend Thom Hartmann. He's the host of the syndicated radio show, The Thom Hartmann Program. He's the author of numerous books, including The Last American President, A Broken Man, A Corrupt Party, and A World on the Brink. Thom, you're the perfect guest here because, A, you understand the labor movement in America, and B, you understand history. So I want you to bring those two things together and overlay it with what's happening today in Minneapolis and across the country and what's going to happen on March 28th with the next No Kings. And tell me what you make of all of this.
Well, ever since the late 19th century, the labor movement has been at the forefront of social change in America, of protest against fascism. And frankly, there has always been a right-wing movement against the labor movement. You know, when Reagan came into office, about a third of us were unionized, people in the United States. Now it's down to in the neighborhood of 10% in the private sector. One of the reasons why conservatives, Republicans historically have hated labor unions, why they passed so-called right to work for less laws and things like that, is because not only can labor challenge the oligarchy, they can challenge the corporate bosses, but they also stand up for democracy. Unions are democracy in the workplace. They're the only democracy in the workplace. Workplaces are little kingdoms, and unions stand up to that, and they provide an opportunity for people to literally have democracy. So when democracy is under attack, it's usually the unions who stand in the way. This is why Viktor Orban destroyed the unions in Hungary. There's, basically, in fact, they passed a law that said you can have up to 400 overtime hours without pay in Hungary.
Wow.
The unions tried to protest. He crushed the union movement. Putin destroyed the unions. There's one union. Hitler only took 5 months. May 2nd, 1933 was the day that he destroyed the union movement, had one official union. I'm waiting for some effort like that, although the Republicans have done such a great job of gutting the union movement in the United States over the last 44 years. But typically, as you point out with the King March, this is where the protest comes from.
So there are some people talking about May 1st, May Day, being an opportunity for a national level general strike. Not the kind of thing we do in America all that much, so there's not that much memory of it. But this is two things. As Sarah Nelson was saying, it's a withholding of labor, people who are in unions, perhaps not going to work. Then there's got to be support from people who are not unionized, because as you point out in the private sector, about 90% of workers are not unionized. And then there's this idea of withholding your economic power, right? It's not got to do with striking and working. It's got to do with not spending. Tell me if you think this is a viable idea.
I do. It's going to be a challenge. I mean, I get people calling into my radio program all the time going, hey, they just had a general strike in France. They shut down the country. Why can't we do that here? And I'm like, well, France is like, 3/4 unionized. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's huge. As are most small d democratic countries. The union movement in the United States is large. It's substantial. We had a protest here night before last in Portland, where that was put together by about a dozen unions. The mayor, I just got an email this morning from our mayor here in Portland, Keith Wilson, saying that this number one, it was organized by the union. Number two, the ICE came out and attacked peaceful protesters with chemical weapons. They're very concerned about this. When people exercise their economic power, then the oligarchs who support the Republican Party and who support increasingly, I think, what you could reasonably call fascism in the United States, start to worry. I mean, this is the basis of their power, is their wealth, is their money. So, the unions are working to try to not only get people in the streets, God bless them, but also to bring economic pressure to bear. That's going to be the hardest part, because union density in the United States is a tiny fraction of what it is in pretty much any other democratic country in the world. But still, we need to pay attention and participate.
We saw this election in Texas, not the congressional election, but the one for the state election, where Tyler Remmett won by about 14 points in a district that Donald Trump had won by 17 points last November. Now, again, it's hard to extrapolate a special election on a Saturday in a world where people are so frustrated by everything about the Trump agenda. But he leaned into his union credentials, really leaned into it. I mean, as you said, since Ronald Reagan's time, there's been a real effort to sort of make unions seem bad and dangerous and bad for the economy. This guy leaned fully into it and won a decisive victory.
And I think most Americans, and frankly, most public opinion polling shows this, most Americans would like a union. They realize that there are union benefits. I mean, I saw this in my own life. You know, my dad, we basically lived in poverty. My dad was selling Rexair vacuum cleaners and World Book encyclopedias door to door. And then he got a union job in a tool and die shop. And boom, suddenly we had a house, a car, and we were in the middle class. I was 7 years old. You know, I'm a member of a union, you know, SAG-AFTRA. Unions have, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that in the 20th century, the United States became the first country in the world where more than half of us were in the middle class. It hit 2/3 when Reagan came into office. And it's down to 43 to 47% now, depending on whose numbers you're using. And the reason it went up was because of the rise of the union movement. And the reason it's gone down is because of the destruction of the union movement at the hands of the GOP.
What do we do? Let's say I just want to stay on this idea of a general strike on May 1st. How do you get the rest of society to participate in this? Because we're not going to change the fact that 10% of America's private sector is unionized between now and May 1st. Whether you wanted to or not, that would take years to change, if not decades. How do you get people to sort of align with the idea that you can be behind something that is a union-fed movement? Because when it comes to withholding your work, that's a union concept. When it comes to withholding your dollars, that's an important economic concept that you can use to make change.
Well, first of all, the unions have a big podium, you know, a big bullhorn. They can speak loudly, and people pay attention when a lot of people show up. So, like you pointed out with the March on Washington, most people probably back then, my recollection of it's kind of fuzzy, but probably back then people knew it was a union movement, but it's not thought of in those terms today. So,
yeah.
The unions are helping make this happen, but people are showing up. Number one. And number two, the unions are reaching out to people, not just as union organizing. The AFL-CIO, I'm pretty sure it's the AFL-CIO, has had this organization for years that you can join if you're not a union member, and you basically get their information and, in the mail and stuff like that. So I think those things plus look at what's happened with Starbucks, with Amazon. When you look at the oligarchs who are supporting the Trump administration and are supporting this, this rapid move toward terrorizing the population, locking down the country, you could call it a move toward fascism. Almost universally, they hate unions. Elon Musk, hates unions. Jeff Bezos hates unions. Right across the board, these right-wing billionaires, by and large, they don't want unions in their businesses and things like that. So I would argue that the union struggle is everybody's struggle, and we all need to be looking at ways that we can support unions, participate with unions, and certainly participate in this movement that the unions are at the forefront of.
Tom, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, my friend. Tom Hartman is a syndicated radio talk show host. He's the host of the radio program, The Thom Hartmann Program.